bad.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Rica Lorenzo, also known as Ricky Brands, and a great episode for you today. Darren Van Dam is our guest. He is the host of Flick Connection on YouTube, a great channel that gives you recommendations, movie recommendations on Amazon Prime, Hulu, Netflix, Tubi. He gives you hidden gems. He gives you tons of stuff, HBO stuff. So really, really awesome YouTube channel. Check it out. It's called Flick Connection. Unfortunately, though, I had some issues with audio, and the audio that was being recorded directly into my Pro Tools had tons of background noise, and the audio that was recorded directly from Skype wasn't that good either and had echoes at times. So I've been going back and forth trying to fix it, trying to figure out which one is the least worse, and then I spent all of my Saturday afternoon trying to figure out how do I just prevent this issue, because I've been having some issues with hissing and background noises or whatnot. So, I'm buying some soundproof foam to staple on the walls and then help out with that. I'm buying new cables just in case it's static or whatnot. So hopefully you guys still listen to this full episode. It's about 2 hours, I believe, hour and a half, something like that. Really fun conversation. We talk about everything and anything. One thing I love about my podcast is I can get somebody on like Darren and not talk too much about what he's kind of an expert in, and that's movies. We talked about a bunch of other stuff, so hopefully if you're a fan of Darren's, this is a different side of him, a different perspective that you probably aren't used to seeing. So and different, just I guess, conversations than you're used to him having, usually talking about films or whatnot. But in the past, I know people have really liked that part of my show. I'll have a musician on and not talk about music much, or have whoever on and talk about something different than what you're used to hearing them discuss. So that's definitely fun for the listeners, hopefully, and definitely fun for the guests and the host, because we enjoy kind of just having these casual conversations about everything and anything. So hopefully the audio is good enough to listen to. Also, some other news. I got plenty of shows coming up. I have a Patreon page if you want to know who I have booked, people that I'm talking to about being on. Support me financially on Patreon. If you can't, like I always tell you guys, if you can't support the show financially, not a big deal. Share the show, tweet the show, post it on any website or anywhere you can, and that will help and go a long way. Rate the show, thumbs up, all that stuff will help. And do that. Also, our YouTube channel, RV Theory 6. I'm also on PARLER at RV Theory 6, Twitter, RV Theory 6, Instagram, RV Theory 6. Podcast has a Facebook page if you want to like us there. Tons of people have been connecting with me recently about having me on their shows, and it seems like a lot of fans of the show have been taking my advice, or maybe other people's advice, about starting your own podcast. I've been getting a lot of interview requests and also people asking me questions about how to start a podcast, which I'm always more than happy to help people do. If you have a passion for it, if you think you want to give it a try, do it. And if I can help in any way, giving you some suggestions or giving you some advice, I definitely will, or even being a guest on the show and help out with just putting out content. So I think that's it for now. Just look out for also the Union of the Unwanted, which is a podcast I do with a bunch of people from alternative media. We do a Swabcast live stream. It's like a Zoom conference call for the alternative media, and we'll be doing another one this Monday, the 20th of July at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Follow me on social media to get those links, and I think that's it for now. Enjoy the podcast. Like I said, hopefully the quality is good enough. If I can improve it and I can fix it, I'll re-upload it with better audio. But for now, hopefully you enjoy this one, and I will see you guys on the next one. Peace. There we go. with me, Darren. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, how is my sound quality? Okay?
Yeah, it sounds good.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have my mics and everything set up yet, but I figured it'd be all right.
Yeah. You haven't done any podcasts in a while either, huh? I think last time you did a podcast was like a year ago, or?
It's getting close to a year. I'm hoping to get it started before I get back around to a year, but I stopped it in order to focus on the YouTube channel, and it was the right move. I'm itching to get back on the podcast, but me focusing on the YouTube channel definitely sped up the growth process, and it's in a good place now. So it was a good move, but I'm ready to get back to the podcasting.
Awesome. Wait, why am I getting? Luckily, I got everything ready before I got away from work for a second, and I'm like, let me swing by the house and get everything ready before the show, because if I don't, then last second I'm going to be rushing around. And
Yeah, I know how it is.
and it's always the case. Isn't it funny how, like, it's weird because we had that coronavirus COVID-19 lockdown thing, and you would think that, like, we'd be all super happy that we get to just chill and watch movies and just hang out, and especially in the East Coast, because I'm from Massachusetts. We live like super fast-paced lives where it's like go, 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 go. And I think there's like some serious importance to having some time to like self-reflect and kind of look in the mirror and establish what you're doing with your life and kind of reevaluate things. And we finally get an opportunity to do that. And it's almost like we miss that fast-paced life. And, it's almost like I'd rather have it this way, where it's like I feel like I'm alive, like you're living, even though you're like on the go all the time. And I think that reflecting time is important. It's also, you almost feel like something's missing if you just spend all your time reflecting and just chilling. It's like I don't feel like I'm living, like I'm not. There's no life experiences to even reflect on. Did you kind of get that?
Yeah, it's we're making different memories. You know what I mean? Like we're not making we're making COVID-19 memories. We're making memories of the experience, but all the memories are mostly us being at home, being a little freaked out, being definitely confused. That's been the biggest thing. It's just not necessarily personal confusion, but just everybody has different thoughts about it, and not just like what's going on, but what we're supposed to do. Everyone's thinking different things, and it's just we're not all on the same page. It's confusing, but yeah, I've had a weird COVID experience because I left my day job, I want to say like 2 weeks before. No, it was probably more like a month. It was probably like 4 weeks before the shutdown. Yeah, I started doing YouTube full time, and which is great. And luckily it has worked out. But me and my wife bought a house too. We made an offer on the house. I think it was March 13th. And that was like the weekend before everything shut down. And there were several times where we're like, well, do we need to back out of this deal? But it worked out, and it has been a nice distraction from everything. But now it's just starting to get like, all right, how much longer are we going to be doing this?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are at that point where just like, okay, well, we get it. We've done it. And, the other thing, too, is like there's no consistency with things. Like things have come in such a reverse order. It's like when things were at their peak, people weren't wearing masks. And now it's all about wearing masks. Like everybody has to wear masks. And the other thing, too, is like everything's become political. Like, no, you can't have discussions about this stuff without people making it a political issue. It's like, well, let's just talk about, let's talk about what's going on. Let's talk about how we feel about things. But it's like immediately, it's like if you're on one side, then, you're defending one perspective. If you're on the other side, you're defending that perspective. So you're just defending the perspective of your team, and nobody's actually like, it's gotten really hard to just find people who are willing to have just a basic discussion about what's going on without everything being about politics. And it's and to me it's like politics is theater. Like it's a movie, and if you get caught up in the characters, you might get emotionally involved, but it's just a movie. I've had Jesse Ventura on, and he's compared it to pro wrestling quite a few times, where it's like pro wrestling, so it's, to me, it's getting really hard for people to just have a discussion almost about just about anything without it being about politics. It's like they just defend their team, and humans are much more complex than that.
Well, and you're right. There's not a whole lot of topics that don't get bogged down just in politics in general. COVID's certainly one of them that it's just wrapped up in it in a bunch of ways. But luckily, movies, for the most part, there's obviously exceptions, are largely apolitical. I mean, unless it's a political movie. But that's something that I found with my channel is that you know as divided as everybody appears to be on so many things, we have a lot more in common than it appears. And right now in particular, there's lots of discussions about race and in addition to all just the political turmoil and the turmoil and the division. But I relate to people based on what movies they like, what music they like, what food. And I think for whatever reason, I mean, we can talk about it, but that stuff, it matters to people. But in terms of like the public discussion, it's just non-existent. I guess it's not sexy enough. It's not salacious enough to talk about like what movies we like in common. But, when people get together with their friends and stuff, that's the kind of stuff they talk about. Unless it's either that, or it's either the stuff we like together, or it's political and it's division. It's one or the other.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right, because I grew up going to a lot of concerts. I grew up listening to industrial music and metal, and going to hardcore shows and whatever. And it didn't matter. Like nobody cared what your ideology was on any specific thing, or what political party you like more than the other. I mean, the thing is, like, politics, like movies or music or food, it's just one aspect of what makes us, right? It's just like, but the problem, it's become like the most important aspect. We're just like, I don't dislike somebody because they like Nickelback. I mean, I might a little bit, but I'm not going to say like he's a bad person. I might, I might question his judgment, but
yeah, your taste, might come into question if
yeah,
they can't prove otherwise that they've got good taste or similar taste to you.
Exactly. But yet, like, politics, people will, and you hear rare cases where you'll have a married couple where one will actually be a liberal, the other one will be a conservative, and they make it work, and they probably fight about politics all the time, but they make it work. But those relationships are kind of a good example of like, yeah, you can disagree on a few things and still like each other. You can still find out or find that you have more things you enjoy about each other than things you dislike about each other. But like politics has become like the end all be all for so many people. It's like they'll just dislike somebody because of their political views. But you know what? I think if you brought people together, like, and sat them down and you didn't talk politics, you'd find out like, oh, I actually like this person. And that happens a lot, and I've had people on that are libertarians. I've had people on, I've had Richard Wolff, Professor Richard Wolff, who is a Marxist and studies socialism and whatnot. And I just like exploring ideas. And one thing that I find, it doesn't matter if it's like a Christian or an atheist, like, most people are pretty nice, and as long as you're not like attacking them and they feel like they can just share their opinions and perspectives without feeling like they're being attacked, they're pretty nice. And like you said, at the end of the day, like, we have much more in common than we don't. The problem is there's a lot of reasons and agendas to I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole, because you're not being interviewed on the Alex Jones. But,
right.
But and I know, but we do have much more in common. And unfortunately, people have agendas and they have motivations to kind of highlight what we have, differences, and not highlight those similarities. But I think the majority of people, if you sat them down, they would get along and they would find a lot of shit that they have in common and probably like each other, regardless if they do have a couple things that they don't see eye to eye on.
Yeah, if you ruled out topics that the 24-hour news networks talk about, they were not allowed to come up. If you got like an electric shock every time one of those topics came up, people would get along. And I think you could even I've always felt like you could even get people on, as long as you're not talking about somebody that's like got an agenda, somebody that's an activist or like somebody that's like really hardcore that has like very different, very established but very different beliefs from like most people in the country. And for the most part, I'm speaking about people in this country because I've got more of a feel on kind of how they feel about things. I think you get people down, instead of asking like policy issues on politics, if you just ask, hey, what do you want? What do you 10 years from now, what does the ideal future for this country look like? A lot of people would describe very similar things. They want people to do well. They want people to be safe. They want our kids to be well educated. They want prosperity. Everybody kind of wants the same thing. Everybody just disagrees on how best to get there. And then it just gets bogged down into so many things, which is kind of I've stayed away from as it relates to movies. I talked about some political things on my podcast in the past, but for the most part, it was about like how like a situation that looked like hyper politicized as it relates to movies. It really isn't. Like it's not what it appears to be 9 times out of 10. And I think people have really got to start getting away, or at least not getting away, but realizing that and this is coming from somebody who and you too, we create media, we want views, we want clicks. That is all the news networks want. The way that they're funded now is very different from the days when kids were walking around selling newspapers. They need a juicy headline in order, and they needed that then. But now it's all about getting that click because that's how they get the ad revenue. And my honest opinion on the state of news in the country isn't necessarily if there's a problem with it, other than the fact that so many people still view it as like objective news. It's just got that, you know what I mean? It's just titled that, but it's entertainment, and they're just trying to get you hooked, get you watching as much as possible. And there is it's just my opinion, but there is no reason to be tapped into those subjects 24 hours a day, the way that we are by and large. It's just crazy. You need to be well informed, I think. I think it's a mistake to not know what's going on in the world, but to just have that be your life and to have it consume you, I don't know how you live with yourself day to day if that's all you're focusing on, and you're not, like you said, like taking not just time to think about, like self-reflect, but just taking time to like enjoy yourself. I don't know how you do it if that's all you're thinking about all the time.
Yeah, it's even doing this show, there's been some episodes that have been harder than others. I mean, I just did one with, I don't know if you know who Whitney Webb is. She's kind of one of the leading researchers in the Epstein story and whatnot. But I've done multiple shows on that, and it's like, yeah, it gets fucking dark sometimes, and you can find yourself almost getting like just, instead of feeling like I'm in a good mood after a show, I could find myself like kind of depressed a little bit. Like I'm like, that kind of brought me down a level, and it's so important because that's something I've talked about on the show before, is that, obviously, like you said, it's really important to be informed, but it's also important to enjoy life. Like, remember, and this is actually something I brought up on the show before. Remember that movie In Time with Justin Timberlake was in it.
Where he's got like a counter on his,
yeah. And I I'm not saying it was a great movie, but the concept was interesting to me, right? Like this idea that like if we could look down at our wrists and see our life, like if we knew how many hours we had, how many days, whatever it is, we have in our timeline, and we could see that counting down every day. We could just look down and just be like, there goes another day, there goes another hour that I wasted not enjoying life. If you had that, because that's what we have, because we know for a fact that we aren't going to live forever, at least for the time being. So on average, 80 maybe to 100 years if you're super lucky, but who knows what type of shape you're in. Even if you get to 100, you might not want to get to 100. You'll be in a diaper and whatnot. But it's like if you could look down, like we might change the way we live our lives quite a bit. And it's, I say it all the time, how the one good thing that comes out of funerals and wakes is we need that like reminder that we're not going to live forever, and that things do happen, bad things do happen, and life is short, and we say it all the time, and it's this, this phrase that we say and we act like we acknowledge it, but the truth is most of us wake up every day thinking we're going to wake up the next day, and we take shit for granted. So it is important to enjoy life and not get too caught up in what's going on with this current news cycle, or go down too far down a rabbit hole where you're depressed and whatnot, and you don't enjoy the beauty in life. I mean, you see it with correctional officers. I know a lot of people who work at the town I live in, Ludlow, Massachusetts. There's actually a jail in town, and a lot of the guys who work there will tell you, like, you work there long enough and it will change your psyche. It will change look at things, because you're constantly around only the worst people in the world. You almost forget there's actually good people in the world, and you start being paranoid that everybody is going to rob from you or steal from you or whatnot. So yeah, I mean, it's super important to kind of watch movies, listen to music, play sports, watch sports. I mean, even stuff that's like, we call mindless entertainment. There's I think a need for it in our lives.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there are plenty of times where I just need to watch something stupid. Like I love a really good movie that makes me think, but sometimes I just need to turn my brain off and watch some stuff blow up. I mean, it helps. But like kind of on a similar topic to what you're talking about, where you can, like you're talking about the having the Epstein related guest. If you, this is kind of my fear for just people in general. Like, I hate the idea of someone that like sits in a cubicle all day, every day, and just consumes that type of content almost exclusively, meaning the 24-hour news networks and all that, because it's just gloom and doom all the time. Like, I've got a neighbor that just resodded his yard. It looks great. It looks like a putting green. It's beautiful, but he's got a big dog, and his dog pisses in one corner. You can't see it, but if I were to take a picture of the little 3-foot area that his dog has ruined and say, hey, look at my buddy's new yard, you would think he's got the shittiest yard on the street. Yet I worry that that's what people are doing. Now, there is plenty of stuff going on in the world and in this country to worry about. But if that's all you're looking at, you're missing out on a lot of stuff. There's a lot of things, to enjoy. And I'm not, my brand and my type of content is not necessarily like, I say not necessarily, it's in no way like inspirational or anything, but I do try to make it a place where people can come. I try to make it a little bit fun, a little bit funny, and just give you like, hey, here's 10 movies on Netflix that I think you should check out, and here's why, just so you can have that, so you can enjoy yourself. That's the whole point of it, which is why I don't like to get into topics like this too.
Yeah. Well, that's it's absolutely true. That's one of the reasons why I love your channel, because one thing that my wife and I do, and she works in the restaurant business, and when she comes home, usually on Thursdays and Friday nights, it's late nights for her. So I'll put the kids to bed before she gets home, and we'll watch a series, a movie. We'll find something to watch, and they'll be like our night. We'll pop open a bottle of wine. And if that means that I have to grill at like 10 o'clock at night, sometimes that's the case where we're eating real late. But to have that moment where, I mean, anybody who has kids, you can try to eat with your kids and try to be, enjoy it. But it's going to be much harder because you're going to be distracted, and they're going to want things, and they're going to, you're going to end up eating your food cold. So it's just our nights to kind of do our thing and watch a movie. And we need that. And it's not, we don't necessarily, I mean, sometimes I was always kind of pushing on the movies that were based on true events or the or documentaries. And then I'm like, you know what? Like, this is okay if we don't learn something from what we're watching. And you might learn something from a completely fictional movie. Like, there's a lot of things you can take from completely fictional movies, from just like, sometimes you're just, the lessons that are learned in the movie by the characters or something you end up learning. You're seeing things from their perspectives and whatnot. So, yeah, I mean, it's super important to be able to kind of unplug and just enjoy things. And even, like I said, we call it mindless entertainment, but that sometimes is necessary because we are overworked, overstressed, all this stuff. And that's why it's awesome when I hear stories about you who you found a way to do this full time. And I assume that's probably what it was. I noticed that you didn't do a podcast in a long time. I'm like, oh, maybe he's focused on his YouTube channel, and I'm sure it, like you said, it helped. Just being completely focused on that. What's your opinion on, and not to go down another controversial topic, I don't know if you consider it controversial or not, but like with the YouTube censorship, I mean, obviously a lot of your stuff is on YouTube. I know maybe it was a while ago, you actually were pretty outspoken in regards to Alex Jones being banned off everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, you publicly talked about that, so I figured.
Yeah, and I think about it from time to time, because thoughts change on things, so I kind of like to check back, like, hey, how do I still feel the same way about that? And that's the thing that I've felt the same way about forever. Is like, I guess my opinion on it wasn't like, I didn't necessarily have a strong opinion like, oh, they shouldn't have banned Alex Jones, or no, he deserves to have a voice. Even though, yes, I do agree with that, but my opinion was more like, now that the platforms have stepped in and said, hey, we're choosing who can say what, now it's like, okay, now you have the responsibility to do that. If you did, I mean, there's obvious stuff before that, like, YouTube doesn't need to have beheading videos and stuff on. But if they, stuff that's like illegal, but if they stepped in on just a content to censor it in any way, now they're responsible for censoring it. And now they're under a microscope. Are you censoring the right stuff? These people think you should censor this. These people think you should censor that. So they opened Pandora's box with that. And had they not done it, then they just never would have had the responsibility. They have the responsibility of, maintaining the platform, making sure it runs right, all of that. But now they're in a censorship place. And even now, Facebook is trying to backpedal it, and people aren't letting them do it. The media is not going to let it go and let them do it. Had they just never stepped into that realm, they would just have these open platforms, and it would be a non-issue. That was kind of my thing, is like, now it's an issue. It wouldn't have been an issue if you didn't do that. That's why I was upset about it. I've never, and this is coming from someone who's never been afraid of being censored, because I don't have that type of content. I did get demonetized a lot during that period.
Really?
It was more because YouTube just cast a wide net. They basically, their automated system for demonetizing content was so juvenile when it first came out. It basically, what we know now, and I suspected it at the time because it's kind of obvious, but we know now, there's data to back it up. There's people who did some deep digging on YouTube. They basically just made a list of keywords, and if you had that word in your description, or if their system could pick out that you were saying it, because they can do that, then it got demonetized. And so it took me a long time to figure this out. Any YouTubers that are listening, I hope this helps you. I would put the list. So like, for people that don't know what my content is, most of it on YouTube it'll be a list of movies that you can find on Netflix or Prime Video or something like that. And it'll be 10 to 20. So I will actually list them out in the description, because people, can't remember, so they want to see the list. The problem is, so many movies, especially the type of movies I talk about, have the word kill, blood, stuff like that in the title. And then also,
I noticed you didn't put those movies in the list anymore, and I thought it was a trick. Well, I shouldn't say a trick, because it sounds like you're doing something. It was a way of getting people to watch the videos and not just look at the list. But this makes sense. I now put it in the top comment. I pin a comment to the top, and it's from me, and it has the list in it. So I still post it, but it's no longer in the video or in the description. It's an external comment, and that has saved me, because I remember even once I had this, because I even bleep profanity in my videos. It's rare that I even use it, but when I do, I'll edit it out. Like, I don't really care about it, but anyway, I try to just make it clean, because that's what YouTube wants. And if it's clean, I believe, right? It does help. Point being, like, I remember I did a list once. There's a Jack Black movie called Bernie. He just plays a guy named Bernie. It's a really good movie. It's directed by John Linklater, who did Dazed and Confused, and it was a good recommendation. In no way is it a political movie, but yet it has the title Bernie. And just
I swear to you, just by having that in the description, YouTube was like, this is probably not okay for advertising. We don't know if it's pro or anti-Bernie, so we're just going to demonetize it. You take it out, you just delete it. For a while there, I was just putting, like, I'd put an asterisk for the I on Bernie or something just so it didn't spell it, and that actually worked as well. But now just putting it in the top comment, it's a little more accessible. You can still see it. That has worked. So it's I feel like for a while there, if anything, I feel like the platforms are maybe second guessing themselves on the censorship stuff. That might be hopeful thinking, or it might just be being hopeful that I'm correct and that they made a mistake, and take, because it's too big of a responsibility. You can't watch everybody, so why watch anybody? It's kind of, it's kind of the way I look at it, but.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, it is one of those things. I mean, the thing is too, is like this idea that YouTube is just this thing that exists that doesn't have opinions or perspectives or, agendas. Like, there's still people behind that software who are creating the algorithms and all this stuff, and they have perspectives and opinions, and they subscribe to whatever their truth is. And the thing is, like, we all, I mean, so much of we all like to say we're unbiased or whatnot, but it's like we all have things that are influencing our perspectives and the way we look at things and whatnot. And so YouTube, I mean, it makes sense. Twitter, all this stuff. I mean, now there's that Parlay. I don't know if you've been on Parlay. It's like a Twitter alternative. It's Parlay, but it's spelled Parler. I think it's French, and it's pretty cool, actually. I've been on there. It looks similar enough to Twitter where you pick up on it really quickly. They actually have a lot of bigger names already on there, including the president, if it's his real account. He's on there, and some other people are on there. And but I think what happens is when there's that much censorship, that opens a door for the next thing to come around, and people are getting upset. And I think that's probably one of the motivators for Joe Rogan to go to Spotify. I think that, throws a curveball to the whole thing, because it's like, hey, you want to censor me? I'll go to Spotify. And now maybe YouTube will be a little bit, like you said, more lenient, because they're like, well, you know what? Like, now there's another alternative, because Spotify is going to start doing videos also. And because you have other alternatives, it's not a monopoly, and you can't just do what you want. And I think that really does work in everybody's favor. But I was with you. I remember hearing I was actually surprised that you were so outspoken about Alex Jones being banned thing, because, like you said, it's not something you really talk too much about. But I love your perspective, and I was happy that people were coming out and saying it, even people who didn't support Alex Jones. And like myself, I mean, a lot of stuff he says is crazy, and he's entertaining because he's crazy. But at the end of the day, like, if what he's right on or what he's wrong on, like, none of that is really that important to me. Like, the idea that you're censoring people because you don't like their perspectives or opinions or whatnot, completely censoring them, where like they all came together and just deleted them. They deleted them from the internet. It's like he just disappeared overnight. Like, that was a little scary, and that to me is an issue. And it would have been an issue if it was a liberal, person who has a podcast or liberal website or whatever, and they were banned completely. I would say the same thing. Like, let people talk. And if it's a silly idea, or if it's a silly person or whatever, then let the public decide. If I want to watch a 2-hour flat earth documentary, I should have the right to watch it and then judge for myself.
Yeah, I got super into the flat earth stuff a while ago. And I don't want to say I've said that to people and their eyebrows immediately go up. I got into the flat earth stuff because I found it such a unique way for me to sort of view and analyze how people perceive things differently, and how people could easily be. If we're going to talk about it, do you have an opinion on?
Well, this is the thing with me, is that I've been down so many crazy rabbit holes where things that if you told me like 10 years ago or 15 years ago were true, I'd be like, no, there's no way. So I've been wrong so many times where now I'm like, nothing's too crazy to be possible, and even the flat earth thing. There's a great documentary called it's by Marty Leeds. He's kind of a guy in the alternative media realm, and he's been on like the Higher Side Chats and a bunch of other different podcasts, but he did a great one where I sent it to it was so good that I sent it to a lot of people who were like, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And they watched it, and you're like, you know what? He's made some pretty valid points in it, And I'll have to send it to you. I'll have to look for the title of it. But so, what led you down that path?
It might have been Rogan or somebody or another, like Duncan Trussell or somebody talking about it. But
Bravo was he was a spokesperson.
That's probably what it was. It was probably Eddie Bravo on Rogan or something like that. But I watched the what's his name, the Eric Dubay.
Oh, yeah.
So I watched some of his stuff. There was a documentary on Netflix I watched just about flat earthers. It wasn't really about flat earth. It was just more about the like culture or subculture. And I did like a little rant just to be funny about it or whatever. But I found it to be a very interesting, it's sort of like almost like distilled way to sort of analyze like how somebody can easily be talked into almost anything just by like there being missing pieces of information. Because what is very interesting about the flat earth stuff is a lot of what those guys say makes sense, especially if you are just missing kind of I don't want to say a basic piece of information, a piece of information that's not common knowledge, you know what I mean? And then those guys are able to sort of fill in the blanks. Kind of like Jurassic Park, they filled in the blanks with the frog DNA, and then it allowed the dinosaurs to breed asexually or whatever. Like they're filling in these gaps a little bit, and it allows them to make sort of a cogent argument. And now that I sort of like picked that up with the flat Earth stuff, I'm like, because I don't believe in the flat Earth, because a lot of the stuff that they did say that would make sense, I was like, oh, well, they're totally overlooking. Like I'd have to like prepare notes for it, but I'm like, yeah, but they're totally overlooking the fact that that's a fisheye lens or whatever. But that's all it would take, would be that little piece of information missing, and then they cover it up with something else. You're like, oh yeah, that's a cogent argument. But now that I sort of analyze that with the flat Earth stuff, I feel like I kind of see that in more places that was maybe a little harder to see. But I just found that to be really interesting. And at no point did I ever think it was like, there's a lot of talk in other podcasts and stuff where they're like, these people are so stupid, and that's a big opinion. It's kind of the other opinion, and I'm like, nah. If you pay attention to the content, you can see where people are being convinced by this, because it's surprisingly easy to do, which kind of worried me a little bit as well. But in no way do I think like people believing the Earth is flat is a like danger to society or anything.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's true. The other thing too that I thought was a little dangerous was how quickly somebody would dismiss it without, like, I don't believe that the Earth is flat, but I'm willing to entertain the idea, and I don't think any idea is too dumb to be entertained. And to me, what was dangerous, the dangerous thinking was somebody has a established point of view on how they see the world, their outlook. And if you say something that goes against that, you're immediately wrong and an idiot. And it's like, there's plenty of examples where, or there should be plenty of examples in your life where you like, okay, I look at things from this lens, from this perspective, new information came, or a life experience, or a story that I heard, whatever it may be, and then all of a sudden I changed the way I look at things. And to me, it was like, well, how do you dismiss it? Have you looked into it? And it's not because I think people should look into it because there's some truth there. It's just because I think having that type of lifestyle where you're just like dismissing things without actually looking into it can be dangerous. And I see it plenty of times in the conspiratorial world where you bring something up and people will argue with you or debate you. And then 2 seconds into the conversation, it's like, wow, you haven't spent any time looking into this. You're just, yeah.
Exactly. And that's another thing with the flat Earth thing is when I did bring it up to people, because I was so intrigued by the fact that it was like getting as much traction as it was getting. So I was Eric Dubay stuff. It's like an hour long, and I would check. I would watch it and really sort of like think about it. But I remember if I'd like bring it up at a party or something, people were very quick to dismiss it. Again, I don't believe the Earth is flat, but they were very quick to dismiss it. But I would sort of press and be like, yeah, but explain to me how it's a sphere. And it's way trickier. Like, yeah, you learned it in high school, but there's probably even people listening to me now, like people that have listened to me before, being like, what is Darren talking about? It's like, no, just take a minute and think about it. You probably can't really explain how we know the Earth is a sphere, because the first thing people will go to is, oh, we have pictures. The flat earthers are correct in the fact that we do not have, like, the only picture of the Earth as a sphere is from the moon. All the other ones that you see are pieced together satellite images to make the spherical. Because when I talked about it, people were like, oh, you can see it. Japan has a website right now. It's like, you cannot, any images of the whole thing with the curve, because that's another thing, to bring it back to movies, that's another thing that movies trick people, not on purpose, but they give people this false perception that there's satellites that are way out there taking photos of the Earth as a ball. The satellites are like almost touching the surface. If you're on the moon and you took a picture of the satellite, it's like almost touching the clouds. They're just above the atmosphere, so they're practically touching. Oh, sorry, my computer's going to make noises. They're almost touching the atmosphere. So we don't actually have pictures, and we also don't have pictures, because this is a thing that this is why I found it so interesting. Because like Eddie Bravo would talk about how he's like, Google satellites, and you Google satellites, and all the images are 3D renderings. Because it's not another satellite close enough to that satellite to take a picture of the satellite in space. So there are not really photos of satellites in space. They're all renderings, which, allows you to sort of build the narrative, which, again, I just found just incredibly interesting as like a thing to study, and how like a narrative could be constructed. I would not consider myself to be a conspiracy theory guy, but I do find them interesting, and I do enjoy hearing people talk about them. And the thing about conspiracy theories that people, by and large, don't want to admit is they are true sometimes. I mean, you mentioned the Epstein thing. That thing that's a real situation. You know what I mean? That sounds completely made up.
Yeah, no, I've done shows on the Franklin scandal. I did one. You ever watch the documentary "A Open Secret" about Hollywood? One of the filmmakers, I think he was a producer on the documentary. Matthew Valentes, I believe. It's called "The Open Secret." It's about Hollywood pedophilia. They talk about the guy singer from the X-Men movies and all that stuff, and obviously Weinstein, that story, I mean, that became public and whatnot. So it's this culture, and then, well, hashtag free Britney, right? I mean, have you
I don't know that there's too much, honestly, there's too much going on right now. I don't think I've heard that one.
Yeah, well, it's crazy. I mean, I just don't think these child actors and actresses, like, I'm not sure the human psyche is prepared for that type of fame and attention and responsibility and anxiety and all those emotions and feelings that come with being that famous. And I don't know if you know her story, but she's been like, she lost like the ability to make purchases and leave the house and do anything. So like forever, since she's like shaved her head, her dad and now her manager / boyfriend has control of like everything. So she has like a salary of like, I heard like 60 to 70 grand a year, and the millions and millions she makes, like her father has control of, and she can't leave the house. She can't decide to take her meds or anything on her own. Like, basically, I think there was one story before where she tried to stop taking her meds, and she had to, take them. They forced her to take them or whatever. But so there's all this stuff going on with Britney because she's like a grown adult. She's like 38, and yet she looks like a wreck when you see her do on her Instagram page and these videos. And even though this what I think one of the things that sparked this conspiracy theory that somebody put in the comments, like, Brittany, if you need help, wear her yellow shirt. And then like the next video, she's wearing a yellow shirt. I mean, obviously there's like a billion comments on her post. So there's probably somebody saying wear like a red shirt, a black shirt. But one thing we do know for sure is that she has like no control over her life, and she has some psychological issues. But I guess this kind of the dilemma is like, how messed up is she that she's not capable to even like decide what to do with her finances, but yet you can have her work. I mean, her manager and her father had her come out with the album and she did some shows and been touring and whatever, and that's completely okay, but she can't decide what to do with that money or when to leave the house or any of that. So the whole thing is kind of weird. But I guess this, to bring it back to something that you're familiar with Hollywood and films and all that stuff, I mean, I think there probably is something about getting that famous that young that could cause some psychological issues. Would you agree with that? I
mean, the amount of child actors that seem to have like turned out to be well-adjusted adults, I think we could, if we sat here for an hour and tried to come up with them, we could probably name them on one hand. You know, DiCaprio seems like he's got a weird lifestyle, but he seems like, when he talks, he seems like a normal human being, you know. Apparently, like Macaulay Culkin, even he's kind of odd, but seems pretty like healthy mentally. But even somebody like Drew Barrymore, who now maybe seems okay, was famous for just being an absolute wreck for like at least a decade or longer. So yeah, I think at that age, particularly as you get to be like a teenager and your hormones are firing and you're learning everything, not only is it the fame and attention, but that you're not living a like, your reality is so odd. Like there's actually a really good movie. Shia LaBeouf is a good example of someone who had trouble keeping it together, and he actually wrote a really good movie. I don't think he directed it, called Honey Boy, that came out last year. And in the movie, he plays his abusive father, who is basically just taking him around to sets and making money off of him. And then this other little boy plays the role of him. But it sort of tried to show like how difficult that life was as a kid, and then him having to like go through therapy. It's pretty dry subject matter, but it was an interesting sort of window into that, and it's got to be rough. It's got to be rough. Like I've got two. I'm sorry. What were you saying?
No. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, like, I've got two kids. They're adorable, and not that we have an opportunity to put them in stuff, but when people say like, "Oh, you should try to get them," I'm like, dude, I'm not putting my kid in front of a camera at a young age. Like, I want my kids to have a normal life, so to speak, because I don't think it's healthy. I really don't. There's enough evidence to suggest that it's not.
Yeah, well, I'm with you. My son's 5 and my daughter's 3, and they come down to the studio when I'm editing and whatnot, and they're always playing with the microphones and whatnot. And so for a while I've been like kind of joking around that like, hey, you kids should have your own podcast. And I've been like going back and forth. I'm like, well, what if they become like Ryan on YouTube, who is probably gonna be doing like coke off strippers, and by the time he's a teen, who knows what? I mean, that kid is like, he makes millions a year. I just heard, you know, it's like, that's crazy. I mean, you're a multimillionaire and you're a kid. Like, I'm not even sure, like, you know what struggle is, you know. It's like, and that's the other weird thing, right? Like, and you've heard, you're a Rogan fan. You know, I had a lot of similar guests as Rogan, and he was a big influence of mine when I started my show 6 years ago. But you know, you hear him, and like Eddie Bravo seems to really embrace being a parent. I think when I had him on my show, we talked about that or whatnot. And you want to do everything that you can to make your kid's life easy and fun and good. But there is something about like a little bit of struggle. Some life dilemmas do make like more interesting people, more interesting, maybe stronger emotionally. So it's like this dilemma. It's like, well, I don't want my kids to grow up to be wusses, but I kind of want to raise them like wusses because I don't want to see them cry. I don't want to see them struggle. I don't want to see them hurt, So there is this like internal dilemma where it's just like, well, I can't make things too easy, right? So I find myself sometimes wondering, I'm like, all I want to do is love them and make things as easy as possible. But is that going to kick me in the ass eventually?
Yeah, the more important thing I think is teaching them how to deal with things like that's. I'm a year behind you. I've got a 4-year-old son and a 2-year-old daughter, and my son's at an age where he gets really easily upset about stuff. And so rather than trying to remove the things that upset him, it's more like after he gets upset, sort of talking with him and trying to help him figure out how to not like lose his shit, and I remember when, we didn't have our first until I was over 30. And it's not like we were rolling in dough, but we weren't, 20 years old and scraping for change. So we had like choice in terms of like what we bought for him as a baby. And I remember we were shopping for a mattress for the crib. Like, should we get this one? Should we get this one? And I remember my wife even like, we were looking at like the nice, like soft one. I was like, you know what? He doesn't need to have the softest crib that they sell. Like, he'll never be comfortable anywhere. If you put him on a, we didn't get him a piece of plywood either, but it's like, you can't you can't completely round all the corners off and expect the kids to do okay. That we're way away from the child star thing, but this kind of comes back to what we started. Is I think we're rounding the edges off of the world a little bit too much. At least in America, we are, because, I mean, despite what you may think and what the news may portray, America's killing it. And I'm not talking about like in 2020. I'm just saying like historically, compared to the history of the world, it's really a prosperous place. And we're just softening everything. And you hear people talk about that. They're like, oh, kids are going to be soft. But people have been saying that forever. Every generation says that about the kids of the next generation. But we are removing a lot of, this whole thing where there's words you can't say and stuff. It's like, I really question how smart it is to pad everything and round all the corners off. Because just like with raising a kid, like people are not, the next generation, I worry about them knowing how to navigate things and how to deal with difficulties if we're like just removing all of them. I'm not sure how that's going to play out. I don't imagine it's going to go well.
Well, and the crazy thing is our kids are going to be a part of some type of social experiment, because things are moving and transitioning so quickly that we can't look at our parents and be like, okay, when did they give us a Facebook page? When did they give us an Instagram page? When did they let us have a YouTube channel? Like there's no past experiences to kind of, no reference point to figure out like, okay, how do I handle it with my kids? Because I've thought about that. I'm like, eventually they're going to want to be on social media. Eventually they're going to want a cell phone. Like, when's the right age? And I'm not sure we figured that out. And people who are kind of doing it now, maybe it's a little too old, waiting too long, so then their kids are maybe behind in regards to like dealing with technology, or too young where they end up getting caught up into it and addicted to it, then we're not going to know what the negative outcome is going to be until some years later, when you're like, oh fuck, I fucked that up as a parent, and I think that's kind of like the scary part.
Yeah, and I think this isn't the answer. It's an answer, it's not the answer. It's kind of like with Santa Claus. Like, you don't want your kid to be the first kid at school to know, and you don't want your kid to be the last kid to know. And you don't want your kid necessarily to be the first kid to lose their virginity, and you don't necessarily want your kid to be the last one. You know what I mean? Like, so it goes that way, I think, maybe with social media. I don't need my kid to be the first one on Facebook, but I don't want him to miss out on things socially because he's the last one. Somewhere in the middle, and we'll just try to figure it out. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that our generation's going to have to figure out what to teach our kids. But I think generally, if we can kind of keep our eye on the ball and think about like what kind of people we want them to turn out to be, then that'll at least it may inform our decisions somewhat. I don't know what else to do other than that when it comes to those things.
Well, the other scary thing is like if we got bullied in school. I was a metalhead growing up, a skater, and sometimes you'd have confrontations with the jocks or whatever, and I could just come home and it was over, where now it's like that's never.
Yeah.
There's never any downtime from that. It's like you'll be getting messages, you'll be getting whatever, people will be talking about you on social media or whatever. It's just like it's endless. And I think that makes it hard too. And the fact that kids can kind of create I shouldn't even just say kids, because I think people in general can create the image that they want online, where you can be envious of a person who seems to have a perfect life and it could be completely dysfunctional, but yet the images that they're putting online says otherwise. And I think that's a huge issue too. I mean, I remember dating a girl who I knew was she ended up being in a relationship after me, and she was miserable and she was unhappy and she was telling me this stuff, and yet online she was like getting married and she was gonna have kids. Like she was telling people she was looking forward to having kids and getting married and putting all these like images online. And I'm like, I know for a fact she's miserable and how she thinks that she's moving too fast or making a mistake or whatever. And yet like it doesn't stop her from like putting out this perception that everything's great. And it's like there's so many people who are doing that. And I think, if you don't kind of remind yourself of that, you're going to look at people, their pages, who always look like they're on vacation or always looking like they're having a good time, and you'd be like, my life sucks, dude. Like what am I doing wrong? And I think this goes into kind of like what we started talking about reflection and being able to spend time to kind of look at your life and all that, because I think it's super important to appreciate what you have, regardless what it is. And there's always somebody who has it worse. And, it's like that quote, like your worst day is somebody's best day, and it's so true.
Yeah. I mean, a big dose of perspective never hurts. I think this, to go back to what we started talking about, the whole COVID situation, the biggest takeaway I've gotten from it that has sort of like helped me get some perspective is, and this is just something I never thought about before. I'm sure I'm not the first person to think of it, but the COVID thing clued me into the fact that everybody's operating on different information. Everybody's making their life decisions and everything on different information, yet we kind of act as if we all know the same things, and we don't. There's a lot of people can be judgmental, and that you don't know what information the other person is operating. And that, I don't know, I've just never had that perspective before, and that has helped me a lot to be more patient, not just with people, but just kind of more patient in general. And luckily, with me doing YouTube full time, I'm finding times during the day where I can. It's very difficult to turn it off. That go mentality. It is like it's almost like a physical thing you can feel in your brain where you're trying to turn the switch off and it just doesn't want to go off sometimes. Like with the news that vitamin D is potentially helpful in keeping COVID at bay. I've started not like sunbathing, but just laying in the sun for like 10 minutes a day just to try to like activate some vitamin D. And that's been a time where I'm like, all right, I'm laying here for 10 minutes with nothing to do. It's bright. I can't look at my phone. I'm not necessarily meditating, but I am trying to like, let me just turn it off for like 10 minutes. And it's way harder than it sounds.
Yeah, well, you hear about like the float tanks, right? Like one of the hard things is like sit there and just think.
I've done it.
Have you?
It's tough. It's real tough. I did it once. I want to do it again. The problem I had was I got a tank that had like a red light in it, like a fairly like one of these back behind me, like it was just red in there, and I couldn't turn it off. I couldn't figure out how to turn it off, and I closed my eyes, but it was still, I could see through. I could never get just dark, and the fact that bothered me, I had trouble letting it go, and I got it a little bit like where I kind of felt like I was like floating, almost like a gyroscope, like I was pivoting in space. And outside of that, I didn't really get the experience the way I think I was supposed to. So I'd like to try it again.
Have you messed around with like psychedelics, or did you do any before going in the tank, or like edibles or anything like that?
No, not before going in the tank. But I have tried some. I guess we could talk about that a little bit. But I recently started. I took on a CBD sponsor.
Yeah.
Because I've been taking it since like October, November, and I find it really helps with anxiety. I'm very much like I'm not a type of person that says like pharmaceuticals are unnecessary, but for me in my chemistry, I kind of resist it. I don't want to be dependent on something. I don't want to. I know people that take antidepressants, and I don't like what I see. You know what I mean? It's not awful. It's not the worst thing in the world, but I don't want that for me. And I've found CBD really just sort of like, I don't want to say it takes the edge off, because that's not what I wanted. I wanted to maintain my edge. I just find that I'm generally in a better mood. So that has helped a lot. And then just over the past year, I have tried, especially with me not being like employed anymore. I've tried some things that have kind of helped me sort of like, I don't know, crack open the door a little bit and maybe, again, get a little bit more perspective. And it's been pretty valuable, I think.
When you were experimenting, is that when you went down the flat Earth rabbit hole?
No. That just sort of happened. That flat Earth thing just sort of, I was like, what is this? You know? But I found it fascinating. I'm off of it now, but I found it so fascinating for a while.
Well, I think it's funny because we became parents, I think, roughly around the same age. My wife,
probably a year apart. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm 80. I was born in 85. I'm 35.
I was born in 84. I haven't turned 36 yet.
And yeah, my wife, she's 38. She's 4 years older than I am. So yeah, so I think there's something good about becoming a parent at that age, you know, because I like the like 30-something-year-old me more than I like the 20-something-year-old me, because I just feel like I have more figured out. And it's the same thing with psychedelics. You hear a lot of people who are doing psychedelics later in life, like they're doing it for different reasons. Like when you do it when you're a kid, you're doing it just to get messed up or whatever, hang out with friends, and or because you're maybe just curious. But when you're older, it's like you really look forward you're doing it for like almost spiritual reasons, right?
Yeah. It's not a partying type of thing. You're trying to figure something out. And on that note, I think that this is what everybody should strive for. And I've had this thought recently, again, because I do have more time to reflect. But I've had the thought, like, if, you know, we talked about, you know, high school a little bit, if or what kids are going to do now. But if like 13 to 17-year-old Darren could see 35-year-old, I think the teenage me would be pretty stoked at the lifestyle and everything that the older me has. I think if you don't have that in your life, then I think that should be a goal. It could be like the goal, you know, that the younger you respects and likes the older you. I don't know. I hope I feel the same way when I'm 50 and 60, you know. That's kind of where I'm at now. Is I'm kind of letting things go where they want to take me, but I'm trying to make sure that we're headed in that general direction. I don't know where I'll end up, but I want to obviously like the person I am, but I want the younger version of me to think that the older person is doing things right, you know.
Did the younger person, you think the younger version of yourself, did you ever imagine doing YouTube full time? Was that something that...
I mean, YouTube wasn't a thing, but yeah, I never had
this type of thing. Like, did you imagine yourself being in front of a camera doing some type of media content type thing like that?
No, not only did I not, my parents think it's super weird. Not so much anymore, but like in the beginning when it started to get some traction, they're like, this is like they would tell me every now and then, like, we think it's so weird that this is like, it just doesn't seem like, we never would have thought that that would be what you're doing. But
So they literally use that word weird. They found it kind of weird.
Probably not the word weird. I'm trying to think of her exact words, but they definitely just were like, thought it was so odd and kind of funny. But I mean, they're very proud of me. I don't want to give the wrong impression, but they were perplexed by it at first.
Well, it's funny because YouTube, when it first came out, like if you watch something on YouTube, it was kind of like, oh yeah, would you watch it on YouTube or you learn that on YouTube? And now like everybody learns everything on YouTube. You know, like I was at work today, and a guy that we have like a little family-owned construction company, and one of our employees was talking about how during the COVID-19 lockdown he learned how to build computers, and I'm like, well, were you computer savvy? No, not really. And I'm like, well, how the hell did you learn? He's like, YouTube. Now I'm like, yeah, that's, and I literally, like, I'm known with my friends, and I'm sure you probably are too, where like I Google everything and I YouTube everything. So it's like if somebody's discussing something I don't know about, or we're trying to figure something out, the first thing I do is I'm online trying to find the answers or try to learn more about it. And, you know, so it's gotten to the point, and now people are doing it, you know, like we talked about Ryan's toy reviews. I mean, it's making millionaires and celebrities out of this thing. And having a YouTube show like yours, to me, I look at it, and I have for a while, but especially now, just like having a show on, you know, ABC or whatever. It's just a different way of watching TV or media. And now with YouTube TV and all that stuff, and you cut the cord, right? You don't have cable or anything like that?
Yeah, no cable, nothing. I haven't for a while. You know, you'd say organized sports is the first thing that like I had to give up, but I'm not a big sports guy. I like football, and there's only so many football games in a year. So I would go for a while there, especially before we had kids. Me and my wife, we would go to a bar. You know, we might spend $60 on beer and food, but we didn't have a cable bill, and I'm only probably watching 10 games in a year. You know, I'm not even watching all 16 or whatever. So it wasn't that big of a problem for me. The cool thing is, just, I mean, I was thinking about the other day, people. So let me beat around the bush for a minute because I'm making a point. The comments on my channel are overwhelmingly positive, which I didn't think was going to happen. I was really kind of concerned because I just know Netflix comment section are kind of notoriously negative. 90+% positive on my channel, but I get a lot of people that just bitch about Netflix. Netflix sucks. It's like, in what world? Like, yeah, I get you wish it had some different movies on it, but it's this that you can just start watching immediately. If you just think back like 10 years, I mean, hell, when I was a kid, I sound so old because things have progressed so quickly. But when I was a kid, and I say kid, I mean a teenager, I would get the TV guide, which was printed on newsprint, and I would go through with a highlighter or a red pen, and I would go through and find all the things I wanted to watch, and I would highlight it. And I would have to, like, I didn't have a smartphone. I would have to remember, or if it was coming like I had some time to watch TV, I'd go, hey, did I highlight anything a week ago? You know, that's all you had to watch. And now there's literally, because I maintain long lists to pull from when I create my list. There's an app that I like. It's called Tubi. They don't endorse me. It's free. They run ads on movies. I went through and added, it took me like 30 minutes the other day, but I added over 70 movies I want to watch on my list just on that one app. Most of them aren't on Netflix, and it's totally free. And there's less commercials than there used to be on cable.
Yeah, you just did a video on Tubi not too long ago.
Yeah, I like it. I recommend it. It's like I said, it's free. It's on most devices, and they run ads, but it's like 2 ads every 20 minutes or so. So it's not that disruptive, and they do have some stuff that I can't find other places. So
yeah, I watch Pluto TV. That's another one that has
it's similar to that. Yeah.
Yeah, it has some ads from time to time, but for free, I mean, you can't. It's a lot of HD stuff, some older movies, some sports stuff. I mean, a little bit of everything. It's actually a lot. My wife uses it to listen to music. So it's like there are a lot of free alternatives, and to get an ad from time to time, I mean, that's still way better than commercials, watching things on cable.
Way better. In fact, speaking of commercials, my wife is just on me to change our. I'm gonna have to do it after this recording. To change our Hulu account to premium, which I've been reluctant to do because it's like $12 a month, but I'm getting Hulu free through Spotify, and I can't upgrade it without just paying the full amount. You know what I mean? So I'm like, we're not paying anything for Hulu, and the ads aren't terrible. She's like, I'm not watching it unless we get rid of the commercials. So I've got to go get that, because there's a lot of shows there I like to watch. I think for like $12, get access to a ton of shows, and for $12 have no commercials. I mean, it's, in terms of entertainment, things are pretty sweet right now. Because I even started off one of my first videos, I was talking about how, man, it might have been my first video on YouTube. I was talking about how, or at least analyzing how there's a perception that people think movies aren't as good as they used to be. And I tried using numbers. I wasn't as good as creating content as I am today, and hopefully I'll be much better, this time next year. But 3 years ago, I made this kind of rinky-dink video, and I tried to explain the fact that if you look at it, just pick a year, pick 1978. The 70s are famous for being like the golden age of cinema in the country. You pick just a random year, you're maybe going to come away with 10 really good movies that are still good today. And that's about it. But when you look at the 70s, you can easily come up with 100 movies from the 70s. But when you look at 2019, maybe there's 10 really good movies. But it's been that way forever. Time just sort of forgets all the garbage that was made in 1978, because there's a lot of movies made in 1978 that never got redistributed. They were out in theaters. They didn't get preserved. They didn't get formatted for DVDs or even VHSs, and they just turned to dust. There's plenty of, it's just a perception thing. Again, there's no perspective on it. All we remember from the past are all the good movies, and all we remember from 2019 is a lot of disappointing movies and only a handful of good ones. But it's always been that way, and that could be applied to almost anything. There's that false perception that things were so great back in the 50s. Things were rough for people back in the 50s, especially if you were black in America before the Civil Rights Movement. It was a horrible time to be alive. And then if you go back 100 years before that, it was a horrible time for everybody to be alive. Like Dave Chappelle's got a great bit about, there was a point not too long ago, if you got diarrhea, your life was over. You had to start getting your affairs in order, and now you can just eat a banana and drink water and you're fine. So the same thing goes with movies. There's plenty of great movies being made today, but there's only going to be a few each year that are really fantastic. And those are the ones that I watch out for. They're not the only ones I recommend naturally, but the ones that I really am always looking for is a movie that I'm still going to enjoy 20 years from now. And really and truly probably only get 2 or 3 of those a year.
Yeah. Network was a great one from, I think, late 70s, right? And that's some of those movies. It's movies sometimes are like quotes or comedians. Like, it doesn't matter what time period you're watching it or enjoying it. It almost always makes sense, and it's relevant to what's going on right now. Network was one of those movies that was like that. And I actually had Jim Abrams on from the Naked Gun movies not too long ago. He was on to talk about the Charlie Foundation, which is named after his son, and how he cured his violent seizures with the ketogenic diet and whatnot. And but it's some of those movies like Naked Gun. I mean, a lot of people during the COVID-19 lockdown, I talked to a lot of people that were going back, and they're like, I can't. So I guess in a way I'm kind of pushing back a little bit, because there are people who are going back and watching those classics and like, hey, I can't find anything good to watch. I'm going back watching old, Back to the Future or Naked Gun or whatever, Mr. Bean, whatever it may be. But it's watching some of the older stuff. But like you said, it's only the good stuff that we remember, right? Like all the crappy movies that came out, we just completely forget about. So that's obviously every year there's some good movies, and then and then there's going to be another Fast and Furious.
Yeah, well, we also think about things as like the 80s, like movies from the 80s. That's 10 years. If there's 10 really good, memorable movies every year, again, that's 100 movies. But if you just look in recent memory, you're only looking at a few years, and there's only so many. Plus, there's other movies that like you haven't discovered yet because they haven't really found their audience. That happens all the time, and that's always cool when there's a movie that's like 6, 7 years old that suddenly like catches on. And that's another thing with like being able to stream these movies on the internet, is you can discover things that you never saw before, which I think is that's kind of the main goal of my channel, is to recommend recommend some movies to you that you otherwise would have never watched. That's really what I'm trying to do with every single video. And the cool thing is now it's so easy to make movies. Everyone has access to technology. I'm sorry. Every now and then I get a little echo.
Yeah, well, I'm not getting it, but I'll
just every now and then I hear myself, but so it's throwing off
quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't even remember what I was talking about.
You're talking about now I can't remember we were talking about movies, past movies, 80s, right? The 80s, 10 years, 10 good movies, and then there's, damn it, what?
I lost it.
What have you? Well, while like, oh, you got it.
I got it. Yeah, it was just the fact that movies are so easily made today because everyone's got the technology. Digital cameras aren't nearly as expensive, but there's way more being made. I mean, you don't realize it, but like every single week, typically on Tuesday, new movies are released, and they're just, you can't find them. They're like available to rent, but they'll be like 40 movies that are new and released and available to rent, and 2 of them get a lot of eyeballs. So now that's the struggle. The struggle is no longer, hey, how do we make a movie? The struggle is, hey, how do we make something that people are going to watch? But that's even coming around again, where there's just all these outlets. I mean, you could film something, put it up on YouTube. You could film a feature, put it up on YouTube, and if you do it right, you could potentially make your money back. And I'm talking about like spending several $1,000s and making something with your friends, but that was not possible just a few years ago, and it's totally possible now. You could do it in a weekend if you really wanted to and you were motivated.
Yeah, and the thing I love about your movie suggestions is that you do pick some weird movies at times and stuff that is definitely goes against the grain, a little different, a little odd. I love weird movies. Anytime you say like this movie is really weird, like that's the one I remember that I'm like, okay, I gotta watch this, because I love, and don't get me wrong, like sometimes there's artistic movies that I almost feel like are artistic with no purpose and no meaning. It's like it's weird just for the sake of being weird.
Yeah.
Which I think is the issue. But sometimes, you find those gems where just like, it's almost like you just learned philosophy. Like you just watched a debate on philosophy. Like there's all these thoughts are going through your head, and it seems like it provokes thought and imagination and creativity. And I love that about certain movies and independent movies, smaller movies. It doesn't have to be, I mean, it's same thing with music. Like some of your favorite albums might be of artists that had, a recording studio in their basement, and so you can do a Fast and Furious movie where there's action and explosions and the best camera work and all this stuff, but yet, be completely bored with it. And then you find some movie that is an independent movie that has a really interesting concept or whatnot, or look to it, and love it.
Yeah. And those are the ones that I really try to keep a lookout for, is like anything that I remember, because, and I'll be honest with you, I think the Fast and the Furious franchise is producing the best movies they've ever done, because now in no way like are they masterpieces or anything, but whoever's behind, like the team that's behind that franchise that keeps putting them out, they figured out how to make them. Like they're self-aware, they're silly, they're cheesy, they're popcorn movies. They don't take themselves too seriously, even though they kind of did in the beginning. And I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a fan of them, but I watch them when they come out, at least when they come out for a rental, and I think they're fun and they're entertaining. but they do sort of put you to sleep. I mean, I've said it before, nothing really put me to sleep like the Transformers movies. Like, I like big robots, I like stuff blowing up, but something about there's almost no storytelling going on in those movies. And then you take something else that's like a big budget action movie like Mad Max Fury Road, and it's still just it's cars and things blowing up. It's in the same genre as Fast and the Furious, but the way that that movie is edited and pieced together is so smart, and they're always telling you something. You're always getting new information with the geography of this car chase and who's where and who's doing what and what's happening as a result of that harpoon going through the steering wheel, and like there's always something changing, and it's just brilliantly put together, and it's a very different type of movie as a result, and a much better movie. And it's one of those movies that I will watch 20 years from now and totally love it and dig it. Fast 8, no one's going to be watching that in 20 years. It's just a different product. You know what I mean? It's a fast food versus, a good steak or something like that. They're both beef, but there's a difference.
Have you ever done a list of movies based on true events or real stories, anything like that?
I haven't, and the only reason why is because, again, a lot of it comes down to YouTube. That is not necessarily like keyword friendly. It's not something people are searching for. But what I'll do instead is I'll do, a hidden gems list, and I'll have several movies in there that are based on true stories, and so I just sort of highlight them then. Foreign is another topic that when I've made a video that is about foreign language movies, people hate it. Yet when I include foreign language movies in my regular list, which I do all the time, it's not a problem. You know what I mean? So I still recommend those movies, but as far as titling a list and sort of framing one that way, I found that to be tricky when I'm a little too niche with it. YouTube's algorithm doesn't like it as much.
Yeah. Well, that algorithm is really important. Like so this guy Midnight Mike, who hosts the OBDM podcast, I was talking. He's a big tech guy, and he helps me put together. I do these like big swap casts with a bunch of people from alternative media and stuff like that. And he was telling me how like once his show wasn't clean anymore, how like it stopped kind of growing. And I'm like, that's something I never even thought about. I'm like, really? I'm like, I just didn't think it was that big of a deal. But he's like, oh yeah, it's a huge deal. He's like, there's certain tricks to playing the system that you can really kick yourself in the ass if you swear, or if it's not kid friendly or whatever it may be. But that's another thing that I'm sure you have to take in consideration when you're doing your list. It's like, okay, how is YouTube going to handle this, right?
There's that that I definitely learned over time, because at first I never tried to do like the shock jock thing, but I did I didn't want to censor myself. I wanted to be myself, and so if I drop an F-bomb on the show, it happens. But over time, I realized YouTube really doesn't like it. Now, they don't mind a couple, but I've just cut them out completely, and it seems to have helped. And I've also learned over time, because I do read the comments, that there are people that just don't like it. It just turns them off, and it really doesn't turn anybody on. So then, what's the point? What do you
Yeah, that's true.
So I came around and was able to censor myself without feeling like I was really censoring myself. You know what I mean?
Well, you edit after anyways, right? That's the thing. So if you can edit it out or whatnot, or do it.
Yeah, I just mute it. If I say one, you can clearly hear that I said it, but it mutes. Yeah. But I generally I've learned to kind of not talk that way. But I mean, I grew up around construction sites, and I don't have a filthy mouth, but I'm not a Mormon either, So I want my personality to come out, but also I don't want to. I've kind of learned to kind of get rid of that element, and it seems to have helped, because that's not really what the show's about. However, on the podcast, I do when I was doing it and when I resume it, I always label it as explicit, just because I'm not going to bleep it out if I say it, and if I have a guest, I certainly I don't want to put restrictions on them or pressure on them. So I just kind of roll with whatever happens there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I think that's why people like your channel. I had Matt Farah on a couple times, and he's from the Smoke and Tire show, a car show or whatever.
Yeah.
But like certain people like yourself and like Matt and Rogan, and I think the fact that you kind of get I mean, I hate to say it, but it's kind of similar to why people like Trump, right? It's like love him or hate him, like you feel like what you see is what you get. Like this is a real person that I honestly feel like I'm seeing a reflection of their character, who they are, and it's just like a movie, right? You get into the character, you end up liking the character. I mean, there's times where like I just love your videos where I'll watch your videos even if I'm not looking for a movie. I'll just see that you have a new video out, and I'm like, I'm not, I don't need. There's no movie I need to, I'll be like deep in Ozark or whatever. I'm like, I don't need a movie for probably another week or two. But you know what? He has a new video out, and I love his videos, and I always seem to like maybe find some gem that, like you said, you're like, here's a gem, and I'm like, you know what? That seems super interesting. That one specifically, let me write this down. And I love the way you describe things, your own perspectives on or your own, I guess, taste in movies isn't like the typical thing. But as you know, like there's a lot of people who are doing movie stuff, or car stuff or podcasts in general. But it's like what makes you unique is you showing who you are, and that's uniquely you, and that's what people end up liking is maybe not even just because you have great taste in movies, but because they like you as a person.
Well, and that's I already kind of bragged on my audience for being overwhelmingly positive, but a lot of the negative comments that I get, it baffles me, because people will be like, I don't need to hear you talk, I just need to see the clips. So which doesn't bother me at all, because
it doesn't make any sense either.
It makes zero sense. You can look up your own trailers. They have them on the platforms. Netflix is essentially a giant list of movies. If you're not coming to me for my opinion, then what do you need to see what 10 movies I put together? If you don't care what I have to say about them, why do you care which 10 I put together? It makes no sense to me. I think what it is a lot of times, because I don't put my face in the thumbnail like a lot of people do, I just experimented with it. I found that it just works better if I just make an image that pops, and then I think people get in there and then they're like, oh, this guy's going to be talking to the camera. This is not what I thought it was going to be, and they back out, which is fine. But I also find that to be the case with movie critics a lot too, is they analyze a movie the way that they thought it should be. And it's like, what sense does that make? The movie's about what it's about. How are you going to complain that it's not about what you thought it should be about? Judge it for what it is, and maybe judge it as it relates to some other movies. Say like, hey, there's other movies similar and they did a better job, or they failed here because they should have, you could do things like that. But to just sort of like, I remember when Once Upon a Time in Hollywood came out, there was, the negative reviews, which there weren't many, but like maybe 20% of the negative reviews were, they didn't focus on Sharon Tate enough. It should have been her story. It's like, that's not what the movie is. The movie's about these fictional characters. It's like, I just don't understand how, especially a professional critic, because I'll say I do not consider myself to be a film critic. I do not even consider what I do to be movie reviews. I specifically look at it as a recommendation, because another complaint that I get from people is, I can't trust you. You like everything. I say, no, I don't like everything, but I only spend time talking about the movies that I recommend you seek out. I don't really talk about movies that I don't like. A lot of times if I watch something and I don't like it at all, I'm like, well, shit, I just wasted time, because now I don't have something to talk about. But that's not totally true, because then it's sort of, my opinion about a bad movie will frame how I discuss and talk about other things. And I've done negative reviews and they're fun, but I generally try to make it not just positive, but like, how long do you want to hear me drone on about a movie that I don't think you should watch? I don't see a whole lot of value in that. Not that people shouldn't do it. Movie critics are their own thing. I'm just explaining how I'm not one, I guess.
Yeah, I've had. It's funny that you say you read the comments, because I figure a veteran like yourself would just be like, fuck these comments. I'm not going to read these. What am I going to get out of this? But I'm sure, like, the feedback you know, like a lot of people say, if you can deal with the negative stuff from time to time, then, you know, you probably do get some type of feedback that is worthwhile and can help improve your channel.
Yeah, I definitely get positive feedback. That's why I don't just read it to stroke my ego. I get feedback on like what's working and what's not. Because if I get negative comments that are repetitive, like I'm in a new studio space. I was using the same microphone setup in my old studio, and the sound quality just wasn't. You know, some people were complaining about it sounded a little echoey. It wasn't a big deal, but enough people made a comment that I got a new mic, and those comments went away. So I get that out of it. So that's one reason to read them, and then finding out what's working for people, I read them for that reason. And then another, probably the last reason I still read them is I feel like reading the negative comments helps make me, I hate to say more resilient, but it does toughen me up a little bit. Because when I first started, the negative comments, they sting way more than you think they would. Like if you don't typically get comments on any type of content that you create, I mean, they can hurt your feelings, but that doesn't really happen anymore. So I kind of like that I've been able to sort of like work that muscle a little bit. I feel like it's probably healthy, but I'll probably eventually get to the time where I'm not reading the comments anymore. But certainly, as soon as a video launches, part of my routine is as soon as I launch it, I spend about the first hour monitoring the analytics, making sure, you know, sharing it on Twitter and Instagram and all. I have like a list of things that I do, but part of it is just checking the comments. And you have a much better chance of me legitimately replying to you in that first hour, just because I'm engaging with people there. Especially if I see someone that's new, I like to engage with them and thank them for watching. You know, if they leave a comment and say, "Hey, first video, I love this content," I thank them personally. And then if I see someone that recurs a lot and comments a lot, I like to engage with them every now and then as well, just because I want to be connected and engaged with the audience.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I try to, for a while, I'm just like, damn, man, I read one negative comment and it ruins my day. But then after a while, like you said, I almost felt bad that every once in a while I would look at the comments and there would be the same person commenting, giving me like positive support or telling me how much they love the show or whatever. And I'm like, I kind of feel like a jerk, like not giving them a little bit of attention also. And because the negative comments in my head, why shouldn't I engage with this person and let them know like, hey, thanks for the support or thanks for the feedback or whatnot. And I do the same thing on Twitter and all my social media. So I agree. Like, it's almost like, you know, I guess if you get so big that it's hard to keep up with it, you know, sometimes I'm just like, how the fuck does some of these bigger people like keep up with it? Because I try to keep up with like all my social media messages and all that stuff. And then sometimes I feel bad if I'm like, wait, did I write that guy back who wrote me on Instagram, or did he write me on Facebook, or did he write me on Twitter? And it's like, and then I feel bad because I know that when I started my podcast, if I was trying to get a guest on and I didn't get any response, I'm like, oh fuck, man, that sucks, you know? And so yeah, it is nice to engage with those people, and you know they appreciate it because they're fans of your show. And I'm sure, like, you know, the way you look at it is the same way I look at my show. It's like, I'm just a dude who's making, you know, doing something I enjoy and just making some content. But to them, it's like they listen to you and watch you all the time. Having any type of interaction with you is a big deal, you know, so it is worthwhile to kind of taking the time to do so.
Yeah, and I've gotten to a point where I can't do it as much as I did before, but I definitely, that first hour, and then there are times if I have time, I'll go just sort of like, what are people leaving for comments? And then there's times where it's like, if I'm having a rough day or like I'm stressed after, like, you know, get the kids to bed, if I go to open the comments but I'm not like in a good mood, I'll just immediately close it. Like, I'll start to scroll and I won't even read the first one. I'm like, you know what? Because if there's a bad one, it's really gonna just like continue me in that negative direction. But if I'm in a good mood and I'm not already in a bad mood, then negative comments don't really have any effect on me anymore. I feel like there might have been one or two in recent months that kind of stuck with me for a few hours, but I mean, there's some nasty ones that didn't go anywhere. I actually had Jenna Cannell is an actress that has been on the show a couple of times. We did a video a little over a year ago, where we played like a roulette game where we both read negative comments about ourselves, or about the other person or something like. I can't remember how we set it up, but that was fun, just to sort of have a little bit of fun with it, because you can't take that stuff too seriously. And I learned that too. I used to respond to negative comments, not necessarily out of the spirit of like, I'm going to set this person straight, but kind of out of just being a jerk. Like, I thought it would be funny I tried to make my replies funny. And I'm like, well, my fans maybe will read this and get a kick out of it. And then I realized eventually that, like, I mean, some people are on pills, some people have mental problems. Like, I never got to a point where I felt like I was in danger, but there was one point where I kind of poked at somebody, and I was like, oh, this person might actually be like on the spectrum. Like, I can't, like, you don't know who these people are. And I've gotten to where I really will not respond to a negative comment anymore, just because it just breeds like that toxicity. Whereas responding to positive comments seems to work the opposite. It seems to just breed, like I told you, my comments are overwhelmingly positive, and I think it's partially because the show is positive, but it's also because I fuel the positive comments and don't really give any credence anymore to the negative ones. And I think that's something that anybody that wants to be a creator of any kind that's going to be getting commentary needs to think about and consider, because I think there's value in that, in supporting the positive comments and ignoring the negative ones.
Yeah, no, I agree. I kind of do the same thing where I don't really engage with negative. Every once in a while I will, and because there is a chance, and it's happened before, where you engage with them and then you have a logical like discussion where somebody would be like, hey, your intro was too long or whatever, and which I get quite a bit, because I have to do all the like, hey, I'm on Instagram, check me out on YouTube, all this stuff. And I try to do it I'm already a fast talker, so I try to do it as fast as possible in the intros. And but every once in a while, less now than before, I would just have something on my mind that I kind of wanted to discuss, and people would be like, hey, we don't want to hear you talk, we want to hear the guest. And I'm like, I get it. I'm like, I do, but I'm like, it is like my intro, it's my show. I'm like, you can avoid listening to me talk by not listening to my show, it's like. And or sometimes if I felt like I had like a rough show, like either like work or life was stressed, and I could feel it like impacts maybe me being focused on the conversation, I'd let them know, like, yeah, maybe I wasn't myself or whatever, to be like, hey, you had a hard time gathering your thoughts or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, I just wasn't and then next thing you know, you're actually having like a positive discussion, like a friendly discussion about, something that's like, dude, we're all human, we're all, and I don't edit like this stuff unless it has to do with like just audio quality, just kind of making it sound better. So if I have a rough day, or if I lack of sleep because I have 2 kids that were up all night and I had to wake up early, that's just what you're going to get sometimes. You're not, like from one day to another, you're going to get maybe slightly personalities or what the topic may be. And also just engaging with guests. Because, I mean, there's 99% of the time, it's super easy to engage with guests. But a lot of times I don't have any interaction with them until we start recording. So you never know what the chemistry is going to be like. Yeah. You never know. And especially if it's like an author who maybe, or a filmmaker who doesn't do interviews or doesn't do many interviews, like, I'm like, I don't even have a feel of their personality, who they are, so that makes it a little harder. But yeah, I mean, I'm definitely with you. I think that there's definitely some good that comes out of reading comments, but as you know, like, YouTube is notoriously known for having really shitty comments. So when you're saying 90% of it's positive, that 10% or 5% that's negative, who knows what type of personal issues they're dealing with, and they're just going around spewing negativity everywhere. So it might not be about you, it's more about them. So
yeah, well, it's even topical stuff sometimes. Like, I did have a good one once, where I was recommending a Kevin Spacey movie, like, let's say it was Seven or something, and I just made an offhanded comment about, like, I probably said, like, how good he was as the villain, or I made an offhanded comment like, we didn't know at the time that he was an actual monster or something like that.
Yeah.
And the amount of people that anytime because I've mentioned it a couple of times, the Kevin Spacey thing. Anytime I've brought him up as as his behavior being a problem, people are like, he's still a really good actor. I'm like, so what? Like, there's plenty of good actors. I don't need Kevin Spacey to be in anything anymore. But somebody said something like, I think you're a little off base. Kevin Spacey, the stuff he did was a long time ago, and he's apologized. And I'm like, I responded, and I was like, I think you may be misinformed. You might want to look up what he's actually been accused of. I probably shouldn't have responded, but I did. And I just happened to catch it because I rarely catch any replies. I just happened to catch it. The person responded. I was shocked. They were like, I looked into it and you're totally right. I apologize. Like they were a little bit misinformed as to what he was actually on the chopping block for, because it's some pretty nasty stuff. And it was like, they were just ready to tell me you shouldn't speak bad about, he's a great actor. You shouldn't say anything negative about him. I'm like, you might want to be a little more informed. And they inform themselves and they change their opinion. I've never seen anybody turn around with a ball like that before, but.
Yeah. And this goes back to what we were talking about in regards to, actors and actresses. I mean, there's getting so caught up in those roles. To me, I would have a hard time not letting it having some type of psychological effect on me, because the best actors and actresses are people who can be completely just believable and almost become that person that they're pretending to be. And so yeah, it makes you wonder, in Kevin Spacey's as an example, was he a monster all along? Is that why he played a monster the whole time? Is that possibly one of the things?
The thing I always think about when you think about just any celebrities, it's not even actors in the sense that they have to be somebody else, but it's fame. Whenever there's somebody that's super famous, like anywhere close to Kevin Spacey level or above, and they seem really down to earth, I consider it a miracle. I think it has got to be one of the hardest things to do, because you're given so much, not just the fame, but you're insulated. We talked about not making things super easy for your kids, me not getting the softest mattress for my kid. These super famous people, their life is just cushioned so much and they're given so much, and they have influence and power over not just the audience, but the people around them, and to not get drunk from that and abuse it. I think it's got to be so difficult, not to just get stuck on negative, but I just recently kind of heard, but apparently Chris Hemsworth, who plays Thor, he's super handsome, shredded, and is apparently the nicest guy on the planet, and charismatic, and people love being around him. That's got to be to not be an asshole and to be that famous has got to be, I think it's got to be just so difficult. You have to fight it off, because I would imagine that's just your natural default state, is to be an asshole when you're this powerful celebrity.
Yeah, I think some people, I mean, it's not to bring it to the whole political thing with cops against, but the whole cops against Black Lives Matter movement or whatever. But it to me, it's kind of the same thing that it takes to be a good police officer. There's some people who can deal with the same situation differently because they're mentally stronger, yeah, or more aware or whatnot. So I think some people who could go, be Thor and be good looking and whatnot, they might have all those compliments they're constantly getting and all that stuff. It might little by little inflame their ego and affect them, or they create this illusion of I'm the best at everything and everybody loves me and it's always everybody else's fault. And but some people can handle it, and you see it, like you said, with child actors and actresses, and you see it with with certain celebrities that seem like they have their shit together, it's amazing. It's amazing when you do see these celebrities that, like you said, are dealing with all this this attention. I mean, I couldn't even imagine not being able to go out to eat without paparazzi following me and all this other stuff. I mean, it has, and every time you make a mistake, if somebody's taking a picture and it's headline news or whatnot. So yeah, I mean, some people I think are just mentally better at dealing with those situations. And you see, like I said, with police officers, kind of the same thing, where the same type of person that's going to handle being a celebrity well, I think is the same type of person that can handle, being a police officer or being some, even though it's drastically different. But even with police officers, it's very similar. One of my best friends is a cop, and everywhere we go, because people know he's a cop, they're extra friendly to him. And it's like, I'm like, I wonder how much of that's like affecting your psyche, because it's like everybody's always friendly with cops. Well, probably not so much right now because being a cop's not the most popular thing. But when you're on a job site, everybody's friendly with the cops because you figure, oh, maybe if I get a ticket, they'll help me out. It's good to know cops or whatever. And I wonder if that affects your psyche too. Which could possibly have a very similar type of response.
I would imagine cops get it balanced out, though. I'm sure they get their fair share of shit hurled at them on almost a daily basis, depending on their routine. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's like name me a person, speak up, in the comments or whatever, if you've never dealt with an asshole cop. But I would imagine everybody has. If you're over the age of 18, you've had a run-in with a guy who was a little too, even if he didn't put his hands on you, was a little too forceful, a little bit too much of a jerk in a situation where he didn't need to be. There's just I don't want to get into that discussion too much, but there's definitely people that are doing that job that should not be doing that job. I mean, and that goes for almost every job, but the consequences aren't the same when there's somebody in a graphic design job that shouldn't be in it. You know what I mean?
Well, remember that movie, The Stanford Experiment? Well, I think, I think it was called The Experiment, right? It was with Brody.
So yeah, and Forrest Whitaker's in it. So that one's like loosely based on it. But there is a movie called The Stanford Prison Experiment. It's kind of an indie movie. It's got some faces you'll recognize, but it depicts the experiment in the hallway. They tried to make it look as much like the Stanford prison experiment. It's not as entertaining, but and I think that experiment's been debunked a little bit because there's got to be still truth to it, but the intensity of it was maybe amplified a little bit.
But I think I mean, I've heard people say that it's been debunked. I'm like, well, how do you debunk it? I mean, I guess they say that, maybe it was exaggerated or whatnot, but I think there's still something about, and I think there's other experiments that prove this also, that there's something about giving people power that it does change the way you act, the way there's an experiment. They talk about people in cars, right? Like people, I think it's like BMWs are the rudest or whatnot. And, it's just a car, but it creates this thing where it's just like, I feel like I'm better than you and whatnot. So many things can affect your psyche. Thinking about giving somebody a gun and a badge and having that type of authority, of course it has to have some effect on your psyche.
Yeah, and it also comes down to the person that they are when they start. Like, who's going into that? Like, are they somebody that's easily going to get kind of wrapped up in that and handle it wrong? Or are they somebody that's very even-keeled, that is like a perfect fit for that job? Because there are definitely plenty of guys that are a perfect fit for that job. They can handle situations when things get out of hand. They can de-escalate things. Like, there is such thing as like, and there's plenty of them, as like an ideal police officer. And I think, I'm hoping that like technology and the future, meaning the near future, allows us, not just for police, but for other things, allows us to really determine like, hey, who is a good fit? How do we do like psychoanalysis in the beginning to determine whether you will be good in the field or not? And not like a Gattaca situation where you eliminate a lot of people from stuff, but I do believe that there's people, the guy that put his knee on George Floyd by all accounts and all the information that I have, which is I think most of what the public has at this point about that guy's past and write-ups and complaints that he had from other jobs and stuff, he sounded like he was just a textbook version of somebody who should not be doing that job. And I've had plenty of interactions. I haven't had a ton of interactions with police in my life, but, you know, I'm 35. I've had a handful. I've had plenty of them that have been totally fine. And I recently, it was probably almost a year ago, for whatever reason, I registered my tag, but I didn't put the sticker on. So I was driving around, didn't realize I didn't have the date. So I got pulled over, and I mean, this guy was a box of nerves. He was like, I was a little nervous at how nervous this guy was. But, you know, I let him know that I had a knife on me, where it was, like, it didn't take my hands off the wheel. We were fine, but the guy was nervous. Like, I don't know why. I don't know if he was kind of young. I don't know if he was new or what, but that's not good either. I mean, it was just a routine traffic stop in the middle of the day on a busy street, and he was a little bit jumpy, especially when he found out I had a weapon on me. But I'm like, I'm not moving my hands, you know. So that I don't know. I think the overall conversation on that has somehow come back around. I know it's getting muddy and it's getting lost, but there is a conversation there about changing the way police are recruited and trained, and I don't know how anybody could really have a problem with, like, us just having a better police force that doesn't have negative interactions. You know what I mean? You know, you compare our police force to a neighboring country like Mexico, we've got an incredible police force. They don't take money from people. They are here to protect people, but you get some jerks in the mix too, and figuring out how to get around that. I think there's nothing wrong with us, you know, in the future having this really, really well-oiled machine of a police force that people respect and are happy to interact with. And I kind of didn't want to get into it, but I'll say, I think the defund the police thing is the most harebrained, ass-backwards thought process, because it's like it's coming from people that don't realize what it used to be like in this country, and it hasn't been in a lot of the country for years now, is people just got pulled over all the time for going 10 miles over the speed limit. You're not endangering anybody, but you get pulled over all the time because the police were underfunded and they needed the revenue. So it was this additional tax on the public, and that has kind of gone away. Like, I'm sure people still get shitty tickets, but not like they used to. It used to be every now and then you'd have a friend that got a ticket. I can't remember the last time. I haven't got a ticket in forever. I can't remember the last time a friend got a ticket, but it's because the police, they don't need to do that anymore all over the country. And if you go around defunding the police, then they're going to start pulling people over more. Then there's going to be more negative interactions. It's just like, it's the absolute wrong direction to go. If anything, you need to give them more money so they don't have to hire low caliber human beings. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's I think in all aspects of life. I mean, if it's a higher paying job, you're gonna get better quality people. You know, it's funny because it's like these topics. You know, like you were saying, you didn't want to talk about. I think, you know, one of our biggest issues in, like, you know, just the world today is that people aren't willing to just have these discussions. Like, why can't we have these discussions openly, just share ideas, and then, you know, not have to get attacked because maybe your perspective's slightly different than somebody else's. So I mean, that's one of the reasons I think people like this show, is because it's such a casual conversation that you never know what road you're going to go down and what it might lead to. And hopefully people get a different perspective or just a better idea of some of you know, my ideas and your ideas and the guests' ideas. So I think it's what makes it fun. But these are all things people think about. You know, these are all, and as long as you're willing to have honest discussions and not be you know, spewing hatred or whatnot, then I think no topic should be off off the table to discuss. And I think you only learn by having these discussions and exploring other people's perspectives, because I mean, isn't that the definition of ignorance? It's like just basically ignoring all new information or perspectives and just saying this is where I stand regardless of any other facts or information. So I think it is. I mean, that's, people need that. People also need movies to get their minds off all these topics too. I think both are absolutely necessary. It's all about the yin and yang. You balance it all out. So I know I've taken up a whole bunch of your time, and I don't want to take up much more. So for listeners who want to know where they can get your content, how often you put out your videos, all that type of stuff, how they can connect. Well, now you gave out the secret. He reads the comments the first hour the video is up. So if you want to connect with him, that's the secret. But where can they get your stuff?
So on YouTube, my channel is called Flick Connection. And then I've got the podcast will be coming back soon. It's the Flick Connection podcast, but I'll be announcing that on the channel. But YouTube's the main place. And then on Instagram and Twitter, I'm just at the Darren Van Dam. So you can find all my stuff that way. And it's really all the content. It's just movie recommendations. That's almost all I'm posting. So, if you just, the goal for my stuff is like, I want to give you more movies to add to your queue in 15 minutes than you're going to get by browsing Netflix for 30 minutes. You know what I mean? So if that sounds like it's good to you, then that's the kind of stuff I'm putting out. Yeah,
I mean, I watched that was a Cell Block something. It was on Amazon.
Oh yeah, Brawl and Cell Block 99.
Yeah, and I know you recommended it. I watched it a while ago, but I remember you recommended it, and then I think you briefly brought it up again in one of your more recent videos too. But I'm like, I hope people watch that, because it is. Well, it's one of your movies. It's like, it's one of those like weird movies that it's kind of a little different, because just the way it's formatted and the look, and then obviously the main character isn't playing one of those roles you're used to seeing him in. But what an awesome movie.
Yeah, that is a good example of like anybody that complains about that they don't make anything new. They do. They make a lot of the same stuff over and over again. That's mostly what they're making. But there's something new and different coming out all the time. You just have to kind of be open to it, and you have to be ready to look for it, because they're there. They're just not mainstream. The mainstream stuff doesn't change up too much, unfortunately. But the new, fresh stuff is out there. There's really great filmmakers doing stuff on low budgets all the time. You just got to find it.
Awesome. And that's what your channel is about. You help us find it.
Yeah, well, Ricky, it was really good talking to you. I appreciate you having me on. And feel free. I'd be more than happy to come on again sometime in the future. And then I'll be looking for guests on my show as well. Hopefully, I'll have my podcast back up by the end of the summer.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much. I really appreciate your time. Keep up the great work. I like I said, I love your videos. And hopefully, some of my listeners get some great recommendations and something different, because like you said, you do save a whole lot of time with Hulu, Amazon Prime. You've done stuff on Tubi, Netflix. I mean, there's so much content out there, and sometimes there's some hidden gems. I mean, you even found some gems in like Disney Plus, because a lot of times you're just like, oh, it's always the same stuff. All I see is the same stuff, and then there'll be some great movie that you actually have to search for that's there. So you're a huge help. I don't know how you find time to do your videos and watch all this stuff, but it does save us a lot of time. And I'm sure, like you brought up, that part of watching a crappy movie, maybe it not making a list because you're like, okay, what am I going to do with this like 2 hours of my life I just wasted watching a crappy movie? But the fact that you're making those sacrifices, I think hopefully people appreciate that.
Yeah. I got to figure out what to do with those bad ones so that I can like let people know about them. But for the meantime, I haven't found a whole lot of value in spending time talking about them.
Maybe you need to do a list of movies not to watch. Like, here, I'm going to save you some time. If this movie looks interesting, I'm just like, in advance, it's not.
I did do one that was what I consider to be the worst Netflix movie. It's the Unicorn Store. Brie Larson directed it, and she's in it, and it's just it's a hot mess. And I did a whole video sort of talking about that, and people enjoyed that. That was fun, but I don't know. If I've got something to say about it, I'll say it, I guess.
Well, thanks, Darren. I really appreciate your time, and hopefully we talk again in the near future.
All right. Yeah, it was real good talking with you.
Awesome. Take care.
Thanks.